Continuing shockwaves around the nation amidst these marches by thousands. What you see here has been animating so many people in so many places. Reacting to the Supreme Court, which, now stocked with 3 Trump appointees, has reversed 50 years of law to revoke the constitutional right to choice in America.
In an article in Jacobin magazine, Ben Burgess proclaims that the Supreme Court is, quote, an anti-democratic monstrosity, which, yeah. But the bigger point that Burgess makes is that not only is SCOTUS anti-democratic, but it always has been. I'm Yasmin Khan with Rebel HQ, and the nation just saw the Supreme Court undo decades of progress in the United States several times over within the span of about a week. A handful of unelected officials undid decades of progress in the United States. Now, we know that. We're all angry about it, and most of us, not all, but most of us saw this coming. We watched it happen. We saw Trump-appointed lawyers take positions that they were utterly undeserving of and unqualified for, not just in the Supreme Court, but also in courts across the country. He stacked the courts with loyalists, and we all watched it happen. Now, some of us watched in horror, while others didn't quite put 2 and 2 together as far as how bad these moves would all be for the justice system in this country and what it meant for the individual rights and freedoms that we've all grown quite attached to. And here we are, helpless as we all now watch a handful of unelected officials undoing decades of progress in the United States while simultaneously erasing, not blurring, but erasing the line that separates church and state.
The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
Now, as I'm sure we've all seen by now, the majority of Americans, and a large majority at that, are pro-choice. They support the right to health care and the right to choose how one lives their own life. The ones who have a problem with that are a very loud and very annoying minority.
By every available measure that we have had up until Friday and over the weekend, Americans oppose exactly this kind of move. It has been polled for some time. They strongly oppose it now that it has become reality. Activists, opposition are materializing well beyond these specific categories, such as the way that sometimes Washington divides things up by ideology, by gender, by geography. Indeed, I want to tell you, as word spread Friday and reaction built over the weekend, it is very clear that those 5 justices who voted to formally and completely reverse Roe, 3 of them appointed by Trump, who got, we should note, fewer votes both times he ran for president than his opponent. Well, those 3 new Trump justices, along with the voting bloc, they are a government minority. They're squaring off against what is clearly a much, much larger American majority.
So I have a podcast, and this isn't a plug because I haven't even relaunched it yet, and self-promotion makes me very uncomfortable. But on the podcast, I look at different conflicts from around the world. I look at what caused them, going back into the history of the nation or the nations involved, and I do this to try to determine how we got to wherever we are today and potentially where we are headed. Now, one thing that's present in nearly every case of civil disobedience and populist uprisings that I've looked at throughout history is a majority being ruled or dictated to by a minority. That can be a religious minority, a racial or ethnic minority, or even a political minority. But that's where we are in this country today. Now, people don't like it, but people are limited in what they can do against such powerful political giants. Even if a majority of the population has the support and the numbers to back their cause, millions of protesters still aren't as powerful as a handful of unelected theocrats who can just wave their collective judicial hand and undo decades of progress in the United States.
Americans are living in a fundamentally different society than last week. Now a constitutional right has evaporated before our eyes. Now a court that operates chiefly through the influence of its legitimacy has, at least according to many, according to the majority in this democracy, we cover what the majority thinks, The court has now torched some of that in exchange for a political and religious agenda. At the first moment, it found the 5 votes to take this action, 3 of them courtesy of Donald Trump.
And in this particular video, we're not talking about the electoral system. That's another story, but I will quickly mention, and as a Texan, I will admit that I'm a little salty about this, that voting them out isn't always an option. Voting is still one of the most important things you can do as an American citizen, but it's not everything we can and should be doing. Either way, it's not as easy as it sounds, especially when all 3 branches of your state government are run by a corrupt political party that actively and deliberately makes it more difficult for Democratic voters to participate in their government in a meaningful way. When asked why Texas didn't allow any exceptions for rape in its abortion ban, our governor said that he would just end rape. For an update, he has yet to end rape, though we are all anxiously standing by with our support in his very, very ambitious endeavor. But I digress. So why does the Supreme Court have such astronomical power that it can literally override Congress and ignore the demonstrated will of the people? Well, as Ben Burgess mentioned in his article, this goes back to Marbury versus Madison, in which the Supreme Court itself decided that it had the power to declare a law unconstitutional. How did this happen? I will give you a very brief history lesson. Prior to President John Adams leaving office after just 1 term, he stacked the DC courts to piss off and handicap Thomas Jefferson, the incoming president. His appointments were approved through Congress, but there were still some loose ends that needed to be tied up before those judges could actually fill their appointed positions. Now, before that could happen, Adams was out of office and Jefferson had been sworn in. So Jefferson instructed his Secretary of State, John Madison, to just not tie up those ends. In response, Marbury, one of those Adams-appointed judges, sued, and the case was eventually brought before the Supreme Court. Keep in mind, the country is still pretty young at this point. The power of the Supreme Court and the judiciary overall was much less than it is today. There weren't centuries of legal precedent to fall back on, rather the precedents were being set, and Chief Justice John Marshall, a Federalist and an Adams loyalist, was well aware of this. In his ruling on the Marbury versus Madison case, Marshall recognized that Marbury should be allowed to fill the seat he'd been appointed to, but he also said that the Supreme Court couldn't force Madison to move forward with the process. Marshall cited Section 13 of the Judiciary Act in this ruling, claiming that it conflicted with the Constitution in regards to the power of the judiciary. He posed the question, when there's conflict between Congress and the Constitution, which one is the nation supposed to fall back on? And so, Marshall overturned Section 13 of the Judiciary Act, declaring that the Constitution was the default law of the land and establishing the concept of judicial review. The courts became the keepers and interpreters of the Constitution, and by setting this precedent, Marshall expanded the role of the judicial branch within the government. And as for Marbury, his case got dismissed. Today, we have a Supreme Court that is running wildly unchecked, shirking the preferences of the people, interpreting what we've come to regard as a living, breathing document in any way they see fit in their efforts to impose their evangelical will on a secular nation. Now, something I think that we tend to forget is that the Supreme Court is made up of people, and people are inherently flawed. We stuck the top legal minds in the highest court in the nation and expected them to be so top that they have the utterly inhuman ability to put all of their own thoughts, feelings, experiences, and beliefs aside when analyzing a document that's 250 years old. We pretend that the court is infallible and incorruptible. It's not. It's a tool of the executive branch. The face of our nation can change entirely, as it just did, depending on who happens to sit on that court at any given moment in time. It's not a system that's based in constitutional law or legal precedent, as they like to pretend. It's based on upholding the status quo, where the elite can buy positions of authority, and the rest of us can watch in silent terror as our rights are stripped away because someone who happens to be one of 9 people in this country doesn't feel like giving us our rights today. Now here's the thing, and this will somewhat echo Anna Kasparian's rant from 2018 that's resurfaced and went viral all over again, and for good reason. I'm sure you're all familiar with it.
I don't care that you're a Christian. I don't care what the Bible says. Like, I feel like it's a clown show, like sitting here trying to decipher what your little mythical book has to say about these very real political issues.
Now, I know I dog on religion quite a bit, specifically organized religion, and even more specifically, evangelical Christianity. I don't have a very high opinion of it as an institution, or honestly, as a way in which anyone should model their lives. I think it's more limiting than anything. It limits thought, action, and emotion. It limits what the world is and what it could be. It limits our roles within this world and with one another. And anything that seeks to limit seeks to control. And as Anna said, I've never really cared about what the Bible had to say, and I've studied it. I took a class back in college. It was a seminar. It was called The Bible as Literature. Shout out to Dr. Ferguson over at the University of Houston. It was probably one of my favorite classes from my undergrad, apart from the one with the old professor who drank whiskey and led us in a round of Auld Lang Syne on Robert Burns' birthday. That was cool. But on the first day of discussion in Dr. Ferguson's class, we were discussing the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The professor opened the discussion by asking us, so who wrote this? And I'll tell you, that was the first time that I even thought about it. In a secular classroom, in a secular university, the notion that the Bible was a word of God was so pervasive in our American culture that a secular classroom full of upperclassmen didn't have much of a response. Someone in the class even said, I don't know, I thought God wrote it. But the minute you're presented with that question, you're forced to think about something that you probably hadn't given 2 thoughts to before. Previously, I don't think I'd ever thought about it for long enough, but God didn't come down from wherever he or she or it lives to write down a mythology of the universe for us. Some dudes wrote it thousands of years ago, 40 years after Jesus died. They were just some dudes. They weren't holy. They weren't divine, they weren't ordained, they didn't have unspeakable foresight, they weren't unmatchably just, they were just some dudes. And anyone who clings to the words of one nonsensical book that's thousands of years old should not be the utmost authority on logic, reason, or justice. Thank you very much. If you like this, please like and subscribe and do all the nice things. Thanks.